In today's video, we have some trade rumors to take a look at, including the Ottawa Senators. Are they sniffing around a few other Canadian teams looking for help on the blue line? Maybe the Winnipeg Jets or the Vancouver Canucks? Are the St. Louis Blues getting ready to unload a couple big-time pending UFAs, including O'Reilly and Tarasenko? And now that Jonathan Toews is having a remarkable comeback season, will he draw more attention as well for the Blackhawks? We'll talk about all those possibilities. Plus, we have news from the NHL waiver wire, some more updates, including Marty Brodeur and PK Subban on their career advancements as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today. First up, we did have another busy day on the NHL waiver wire. Of course, yesterday we had 3 players on waivers, and we do have a claim today. The Seattle Kraken have claimed goalie Magnus Hellberg back from the Ottawa Senators. Of course, the Senators claimed him on waivers a while back after Anton Forsberg got hurt. Of course, Cam Talbot started the season injured because he was hurt in the preseason with a rib injury. Once Forsberg obviously he wasn't out for very long, mind you, but they were kind of a little bit desperate there for a short spell. Hellberg came in for the most part, backed up, ended up playing one game where he got the win, had a good game, but they just couldn't really keep 3 goalies around. The team cited roster flexibility for putting him there because they were kind of hoping in a way they could keep him, but it just wasn't going to work out. Of course, so he goes back to Seattle. They did have first dibs to reclaim him. As long as no other teams put claims in, they are able, because of the fact that he was there before, to reassign him right to the minors. They don't need to put him through waivers and have him clear again. So we'll see. I'm not sure if that was the case or not. We'll find out once he's officially on the Kraken roster. We see an announcement from them, but if they do assign him, that's the reason why they can do that. But if other teams put in a claim but they got him, then they won't be able to. They'll have to keep him on the NHL roster. So we'll see how that works out. Either way, he's a Kraken once again. Nikita Zaitsev from Ottawa and Mike Reilly from Boston were not picked up. They did clear waivers, and they can be now reassigned to their team's American Hockey League affiliates. Mike Reilly likely will be assigned. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Zaitsev in Ottawa. No really clear cut. Even if he is assigned, it doesn't mean they're going to make him report. It could be a paper transaction. I really don't know how they're going to handle things. I suspect we'll get a little bit more details from Ottawa here shortly because there is word that they might be working on a trade, which we'll talk about here in the trade section here in a few minutes' time. But for right now, Zaitsev did clear, still with the Senators. Can be assigned, waiting for more details, I guess was what we'll call it from there. And a new player on waivers today, and it's another goaltender, and it's the Vegas Golden Knights placing goaltender Laurent Broissoit. Of course, he started the year injured as well, still recovering from off-season surgery, just like his counterpart from last year, Robin Lehner. They both were down and out injured with big recovery times. Of course, Lehner's going to be out for the entire season now. Broissoit is ready to come back now. Thankfully for Vegas, though, Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson have been holding down the fort and doing a good job. And at this point, Broissoit is kind of a third goaltender, a little bit of a luxury for them. So they're going to try to get him assigned to the minors. So obviously their cap situation kind of dictates that they kind of need to do that as well once he's ready to come off LTIR. So another interesting goaltender with some successful results in the past. Now, he hasn't always been a top-notch goalie, but he's been a decent backup. Had a rough start in Edmonton, but those teams that he played on weren't the greatest either. Had pretty good success in Winnipeg, backing up Connor Hellebuyck there for a while. So I don't know where he'll end up, if anywhere. Maybe he stays in Vegas. Teams might shy away because of the injury history that he's had and the surgery he's just coming off of. But in another interesting option in the goalie world for teams that might be looking to pick somebody out, because we know there are teams out there for sure. As far as injury updates go, a couple of key ones. Charlie McAvoy comes back for Boston tonight, hence the Mike Reilly being on waivers and being reassigned. So McAvoy returns. The Bruins really got through their injuries to start the year miraculously well and didn't really miss a beat. Obviously, they're well coached, well structured, and that's paid dividends for them here. And now they're basically, pretty well back to full strength and tops of the league. So you got to think they're going to be a strong team to contend with this year. Goaltender Jeremy Swayman's hurt right now. He'll be out for a little while, but for the most part, this team is a lot healthier than it was to start the year for sure. The Vancouver Canucks last night did lose Tanner Pearson. He's officially on injury reserve as well. The Penguins ran into some injury issues. I haven't seen updates yet, so I'm not sure the status. But at one point, they were down to, I believe, 3 defensemen, and Jeff Carter had to play a shift or 2 on D. They had a couple guys go down hurt last night, including Ruda, who took a big hit from Ovi. I think Pierre-Olivier Joseph was hurt, and I think Petrie missed a little bit of time too. I think he eventually came back, though. I didn't get to see all of that game. I only seen bits and pieces, so I'm not sure exactly who was in and out, but there was a lot of things going on in that Penguin blue line last night, so they very well could be in some issues there, but we'll have to wait and see further updates before we know more about that. A couple of other career updates, you could call it. Marty Brodeur, one of the greatest goalies of all time. Of course, we know has been working with the Devils for some time. Worked in the Blues front office for a little while after retiring before that. But for right now, he's been like an advisor, and he's also been working like an advisor in hockey ops, and then he's also been working on the business side, and now his full-time transition to the hockey side of the business is now, new title is the VP of Hockey Operations. So, like I said before, he was an advisor and doing stuff on the other side, the business side, the corporate world, like sponsorships and all that. And now he's strictly a little bit more focused here. Some wonder if long-term he may want to eventually, down the road, become a general manager. At this point in time, Tom Fitzgerald is still the GM of the Devils. He's still the head honcho there in hockey operations department for New Jersey, so I don't think there's anything from his standpoint at least to be concerned about. But sometime down the road, whenever the time comes for Fitzgerald to move on, for whether he wants to or the team wants a new voice to lead that, a new GM, I wouldn't be shocked, especially if it's a little bit into the future, if Brodeur eventually becomes that guy. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, he's a legend in his own right here, and certainly going to be, still looks like he wants to have a longer career on the hockey ops side. So we'll see how things work out for him, but it just seems right for him to be with the Devils. Doesn't seem, it seems weird for his brief time there in St. Louis, but we'll see how things work out for him. Hopefully it works out good. PK Subban, of course, recently retired at a fairly young age, is now officially a part of ESPN's crew and has signed a multi-year contract to be a hockey analyst and in the studio and an in-game analyst as well. So PK, of course, we all knew, this is no shocker, no surprise, that he was going to get into media when his time as a player came to an end. I don't think any of us kind of thought it would be so quickly, but I know myself, I was thinking in the offseason when he was looking for a contract, like, I'm not sure what exactly ESPN's paying him, but consider what he can earn in the broadcast world as a big time former player that's a well-recognized name, a big personality. I don't know if it really makes sense for him to play for league minimum when he can kickstart his broadcasting career and have other opportunities at his fingertips here that he might be able to make as much or more money. I don't know, right? I mean, I know some broadcasters make more than others, but the U.S. TV deal, of course, with ESPN and Turner running things down there now. I think the game, from a broadcasting perspective, and just where everything is at down there in the U.S., I think is in real good shape, real good hands. There's lots of good names involved in both of those operations, so that's good to see. And I have no doubt PK is going to be really good at being a broadcaster and an analyst, and he's probably going to end up being at that way longer than he ever was an active NHL player. And like I said, long-term wouldn't surprise me if he's even more successful at that and makes more money throughout his life than he did in his short, fairly short, long by some standards, NHL career. Now, on to the trade section of the day. Yesterday, we talked about the Ottawa Senators with Zaitsev going on waivers and Hellberg going on waivers. Were they up, sniffing around for a trade? There was some talk between Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver that there was a lot of scouting going on between those three teams. But today was discussed further by Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick on the Jeff Merrick Show. And Merrick thinks that it's more likely that they were looking at Vancouver and Winnipeg more so than Montreal. Now, of course, when you look at the Habs blue line, they're certainly not going to move any of their young defensemen. They have 3 young D that's been playing pretty regularly there and having a real good start to their young careers in Arbor Jacki, Caden Gooley, and Jordan Harris. And I don't see, it would not make any sense at all for Montreal to want to move those guys. So the guys that they might consider moving would be like a Chris Weidman, maybe David Savard, Joel Edmondson, but they need a couple of vets to play with these guys. They can't be entirely young. I don't really think David Savard or Joel Edmondson makes sense at all. I don't see the Senators wanting Weidman back. He played there a long time, so they're very familiar with him, but I don't think he's the kind of defenseman they want. They want more of a steady, stay-at-home guy. They have their offensive D. They need the defensive perfectionist or style of the guys to kind of help lock things down, because that's where their issues are. So that doesn't make sense. Now, of course, they also picked up Jonathan Kovacevic from Winnipeg earlier on waivers. I thought, well, that might be a player that interests them. He's at mid-25 range. Not much. He's got a couple years left on his contract, but it's under $1 million. Shoots right. He seems to be decent metrics. Like, it'd be a good player to take a chance on, so to speak. But where he was picked up on waivers by Montreal this year, theoretically, they can't trade him. When you pick up a player on waivers, you can put him back on waivers if you want, but you can't trade him for the rest of the season without the other team that you took him from getting first crack at getting him back. So they'd have to go to Winnipeg and say, like, hey, do you want this guy back? No? Okay, we're going to trade him. And that's just not going to happen. If another team thinks the player you picked up on waivers is going to be a tradable asset, they're going to be like, yeah, sure, we want him back. And then they'll trade him to get some assets, or they'll keep him, right? So I don't really think there's a fit there with Montreal. Now, I wonder, though, if there could be some other stuff going on with the Habs in either Vancouver, Montreal, or Ottawa, that might make sense. Because we know the Habs also have an abundance of forwards. And not that Ottawa really needs forwards per se, but with the Josh Norris injury, I wondered if maybe they're looking at like a centerman. I don't know. Some thought maybe Sean Monahan. I'm like, I don't think so. I think Montreal right now is probably going to want to hold on to him a little bit longer to try to get more value. I mean, they basically got him for nothing, so anything they get would be a bit of a bonus, but I'm not completely sold on the idea that they don't want to keep him on a short-term basis, at least right now, too. So I don't know. I'm just not really sure that makes sense. So if you look at the Winnipeg Jets and the Vancouver Canucks, a couple of names that make sense from Winnipeg, because we know that Pierre Dorion himself was in Winnipeg. Now, Trent Mann was in Vancouver before that. So there's lots of scouting going on, but some of the stuff is always, not always, but some of it is kind of pre-planned. Some of it is a different type of scouting. Obviously, they want to get ready for opponents. So you can't take everything as a potential trade trip or trade research type of thing. So from Winnipeg's standpoint, guys like Dylan DeMello, who of course the Senators are familiar with, or Neil Pionk, they would be more of the guys that would make sense. Now, so we know that the Winnipeg Jets have young defensemen that need more playing time and are getting pretty grumpy, not getting it, like a Ville Heinola. So there's some that think maybe the Jets will want to move one of their vets to give this guy a chance. But at the same time, the team's doing well. Winnipeg's had a good start to the season. Do they really want to mess with that? I mean, as much as they don't want Heinola to eventually be like, okay, I want out of here, at the same time, you don't want to, move players that are playing well. So I'm not sure, but that would be, from an Ottawa perspective, what they'd be looking at. In Vancouver, I can see maybe Luke Shen or maybe a Kyle Burrows. I don't think they'd want anybody else there. They're sure as heck not. I know I've seen Vancouver fans on social media clamoring about maybe the Ottawa wants Tyler Myers or Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Like, listen, I know they took Nikita Zaitsev. I know that that's a bad contract. I know that's a bad trade. But do they really want to find a way to get rid of Zaitsev to take on one of those guys? I would hope not. That would make no sense. To me, long term, I think they have the D prospects in their system to fill the spots they need over the next couple of years. They need somebody who can be more of a placeholder short term, nothing too expensive, but somebody who can come in and, not tied to a long-term deal, but kind of stabilize things for a year or two. That's really all they're looking for. So some of these guys that are, a little bit cheaper contracts can come in and play third pair minutes, because when they get Artem Zub back, like I said, they're going to have Shabbat Zub and then Sanderson. They get, obviously, Sanderson's going to be long-term be their best D. I looks that way. You also have Eric Brandstrom has done pretty well. Guys like, besides Zaitsev, Holden and Hamonic eventually either need to move down the lineup or move out of the lineup. So that's what they're trying to replace. So I'm not sure, but a Winnipeg Senators or a Vancouver Senators trade might be something to come up with. Elliot Friedman today said on the Merrick Show that he said his spidey senses were going off, that something is brewing, something is up, and thinks that we might see a Sens trade for a D here very shortly. So we'll see if he's on to something and exactly who their target turns out to be. Now, players I want to talk about as well come from talk from Pierre LeBrun. Of course, the well-connected NHL insider, works for TSN, also writes for The Athletic. One of his recent articles talks about some pretty big-name veteran forwards that he believes are going to be available here at the deadline. And these trades that he's talking about in this article likely aren't something we see here like this week or this month, but later into the season when it's a little bit easier to do. But Jonathan Toews, for example, is a player who's got a real good start to the season. We know Toews and Kane are going to be hot topics later in the year in Chicago about potentially moving out. Now, of course, we also know they both have full control with a no-move clause, So if they don't want to move, they won't be. And they can also call their own shot, which is going to diminish their value. So we don't expect a huge return to Chicago, but at the same time, the Blackhawks are going to have to be willing to retain half of the contract. And depending on who the acquiring team is, they might even need a third party to retain a little bit more. So we'll have to see where that goes. But he talks about the fact that Jonathan Toews, at the beginning of this season, many people thought, and I would agree with this because I felt this way too, that Patrick Kane would have way more interest in Toews, and that Toews would be the less likely of the two to really get to possibly move. Of course, if Kane decides he doesn't want to go anywhere, well, that's not happening either. But I think the interest will be through the roof on Patrick Kane. Jonathan Toews, I don't know, right? But the way he's playing right now, and if you look into a team like the Avalanche, for example, who really need a number 2 center, he could be that guy. He's a long-term NHL captain who's won the Stanley Cup before, real solid history of a solid two-way centerman. He could be a good fit there. And he's not the only guy on this topic that we're talking about today would be a good fit in Colorado. But either way, the fact is he's playing really well and he should generate a lot of buzz. And I think it's going to increase the odds of him being moved at the deadline here. And the other players he's talking about is St. Louis. And, of course, then you get Bo Horvat in Vancouver. But the St. Louis guys, like St. Louis is a train wreck right now, and they just can't seem to get it together. Doug Armstrong's made it clear that Craig Berube, the head coach, is not going anywhere. And there's a lot of talk, and this has been talked about by a few NHL insiders, including LeBron, about Tarasenko and O'Reilly. They're both pending UFAs. Are they likely going to be re-signing? It doesn't look that way. Right now, we know that Vladimir Tarasenko requested a trade like a year and a half ago. It's never happened. We've never got confirmation, and he's rescinded that. So I personally think the odds of him re-signing in St. Louis are very, very slim to begin with. But he's also proven that his shoulders in good shape. He can stay healthy, and he can score. So I think there would be good interest and good value in Tarasenko. So I think, even though a couple of years ago when they were struggling and they brought up Binnington and they went on to win the Cup, the odds of that happening again are extremely slim. I don't think have like a magic bullet here in their back pocket to pull that off a second time. So I don't know that Doug Armstrong is going to be so patient this time around. And he's also proven before that he's not afraid to make a big move with a top name UFA, including his former captains. He's moved David Backes. Alex Pietrangelo, of course, ended up going out via free agency. He moved Paul Stastny at the deadline when he was a pending UFA. Even though the team was trending towards playoffs, he's not afraid to do this, and he has a history of it. So you get Ryan O'Reilly's had an absolutely atrocious start to the season. Looks like he's a step behind, so I think some regression has finally kicked in. I know he does a really good job of looking after his body and training in the offseason, but it's just Father Time is undefeated, and I wonder if that's playing a role here in his play. I do know he lost line mate David Perron, of course, who's not back and ended up signing in Detroit. That's probably a bit of an impact, but it's not everything. He's not always had Perron. He's been a very successful player throughout his career. So, of course, O'Reilly, another guy pending UFA. He has no trade protection in his contract. Might make sense that, if they're going to be in a situation where they're having a terrible year, does it make sense for them to re-sign a 32-year-old player to a multi-year deal? I don't know that it does. I don't see Armstrong wanting to do that. I can see both these players being available for the right price later in the year. If the Blues are willing to retain some salary, it could make a lot of sense for a lot of teams. Imagine O'Reilly going back to his old stomping grounds in Colorado. Now, that might be weird because obviously he left there on not the greatest terms. If you remember a while back and early in his career, he signed a 2-year, $10 million offer sheet with the Calgary Flames, which the Avalanche begrudgingly matched. And then, of course, the Avalanche later traded him to the Sabres. Because the relationship was tarnished at that point and just didn't really work out getting another contract done. So, be interesting to see if he could make a return there. But somebody's going to go back to Colorado. I mean, that seems to be the prediction, is that they're going to make a trade for a number 2 center sometime between now and the deadline, whether it's O'Reilly, whether it's Toews, or Bo Horvat in Vancouver. I mean, you got to think the Canucks at this point might be really kicking themselves for that JT Miller contract. Miller's had an atrocious year. Look at the giveaways this guy's had, and the effort at times when you're looking on the defensive side of the puck, it's just non-existent. I don't know what's going on with JT Miller, but I tell you, they've got to be looking at things going, what did we do here? They already had a cap issue with long-term deals that weren't working out, and they just might have added another one here. And because of that, if they're going to be inconsistent, like Darren Dreger said to Vancouver media, he doesn't think Bruce Boudreau is going to get fired, because typically when you change the coach, you usually get a bit of a new coach bump and the team starts playing well. And if they're going to bottom out, it makes sense to bottom out and go for Connor Brodeur in the 23 NHL draft. So you got to wonder what their strategy is going to become here as this season gets a little bit further into it. There's still lots of times for them to change gear. So I don't know about Vancouver in that respect, but with Bo Horvat off to a phenomenal start like he is, he's scoring at will here. Are we going to have another situation like we did with JT Miller last year? Have a career year when you need your contract extended, and then is there going to be regression? I'm sure they're going to be very leery of that, given with how things are going with Miller. I think the whole signing of Miller, to me, is very likely going to lead to Horvat moving on. But there would be a big market for him in the trade front as well, especially playing the way he has been. So it could mean, some good assets for the future in Vancouver. So I don't know, between Horvat, Toews, O'Reilly, Tarasenko, some big names are emerging for later into the season when it's going to get real interesting between February and March around the NHL trade deadline. And of course, like I said, the Ottawa Senators appear to be sniffing around for a deal on the blue line. So we'll see what happens there. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.